Hi, I'm Mark from An American in Russia. Now, when I came to Russia, I thought I was here for a while to teach. Turns out, I was the one about to get an education. Not in grammar, but in life. Russia didn't just teach me how to survive -30 winters or read Cyrillic. It reshaped how I think, how I live, even how I see the world. And no, I didn't expect that. But today, I want to share how this country quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, changed me. I was 44 years old when I first moved to Russia. Not exactly an age when you expect to reinvent yourself. I already had a well-formed view of the world. I was conservative, traditional, patriotic. I was brought up as one of 4 kids, a Catholic upbringing, and a solid sense of what normal life looked like. Then, 9/11 happened. I had just been in New York that weekend. I got home on the 9th. A couple of days later, I sat watching TV like people from all over the world. But I was realizing that thousands of people had gone to work that morning with future plans for dinner, retirement, maybe even for the weekend. And by mid-morning, they all shared something in common. They were all dead. Dead also were any plans they had for themselves or for their families. That event affected me hard. It pushed me to stop waiting. I had met my future wife 18 months earlier, and we decided maybe the future starts now. Fast forward to JFK Airport, New York, November 2001. Ironically, I expected to see soldiers with rifles in Russia. Instead, it was New York City that had troops with M16s. When I landed in Russia, there were no soldiers, no AK-47s, just cold air, gray skies, and unfamiliar territory. A 4-hour layover turned into an overnight adventure. But that's a story for another time. And finally, a reunion with my future wife. We still had a 2.5-hour drive to Chelyabinsk. I stared out at the gray, but rather ugly buildings and thought, Mark, you impulsive idiot. Doubts filled my head, but I pushed them aside and told myself to sleep on it. Things often look better in the morning. When we arrived at my wife's apartment, I encountered my first podiyezd. That's the Russian apartment building entryway, and to me, kind of scary. When I arrived in 2001, the Russian podiyezd, or apartment entrance, could be a very scary place. If the entrance is so scary, what might await me behind that door? And also the kind of elevator that makes you question your life choices. I was exhausted and my mind was breaking, but I thought, just rest. Let's see what this life looks like tomorrow. And life did begin. Bureaucracy came first. With my visa, we had to register within 3 business days. That meant offices, papers, and navigating a system that looked chaotic, but somehow it worked. There was always a line which, although it was unformed, it didn't look like a line, but you always knew who you were behind, and so did they, etc., etc., etc. And it always seemed like there was somebody always pretending they just had a quick question in that office in order to try to sneak in front of you. You were never relaxed waiting in these lines. You were stressed and tired and tense, but you just learned to do it that way. I learned that trying to understand Russia by using Western logic was a waste of time. Every situation had its own unspoken system. Once you figured out the local rules, whether it was queuing or paperwork or train tickets, things started to make more sense. But you needed to figure out how it actually was, not how you thought it should be. One time, I was at one of the Moscow airports, and I was in a line behind a group of Americans. We were waiting in line to get through security, and there was a lot of people. Well, the Americans were trying to politely wait in line, but I knew better. I found a way to get ahead of them, not because I was rude, but because I was learning how things actually work here. Back in the early 2000s, Russians had a very different work-life balance from what I was used to. In America, working 60 hours a week was a badge of honor. In Russia, people had a saying, "Work is not a wolf. It won't run into the forest." Meaning, the work will still be there in the morning. Russians valued their off time, weekends in the woods or in the countryside or at the dacha, grilling shashlik, or just sitting with friends. I learned to slow down. And that change wasn't just external, it was internal also. My idea of what productivity looked like began to shift. My priorities shifted too. Some things were harder to understand. I remember hearing and reading about local politicians or local bureaucrats who were clearly using their position for personal gain. They were stealing. I'd ask, why do people keep voting for them? You see, there were a lot more elected offices in the 2000s than there are today. The answer I got was unexpected. Maybe they've already stolen enough, so now they'll finally do their job. If we elect somebody new, they'll have to start the whole process of enrichment from the beginning. Twisted logic? Sure. But in some strange way, it made sense. Better the devil you know, right? I didn't agree with the corruption, but I did come to understand it. That alone was a shift in my mindset. I remember visiting my son back in the US after living in Russia for about 10 years. We sat down to watch TV, and I made a very non-PC comment about the show that they were about to watch. I mean, it just came out of my mouth. My son looked at me and said, "Dad, I know you've been living overseas, but you can't say stuff like that here anymore." And by here, he meant outside of there, and within his house, it was fine. Well, the situation reminded me of that frozen alpine mummy they found, like he was preserved in time.
This human mummy found intact, and scientists believe he died more than 5,000 years ago. Because of new DNA technology, they're reimagining what he actually looked like. CNN's Michael Holmes has more.
Until now, he was thought to be light-skinned and hairy, but new research finds he was more likely dark.
Well, I guess I was preserved too. I was frozen in the culture of the early 2000s from America. But my son was also right. I had changed. I had become more blunt, more direct, more Russian, in a way, and honestly, I liked it. Another example of my mind shift. In the US, if your shoes wear out, you toss them out, get new ones. In Russia, you go to a cobbler. Cobbler, I only heard the word from children's fairy tales when I was growing up, but they have them here. In case you don't know the meaning of the word, cobbler repairs shoes. Clothes don't fit the way you want them to? No problem. Take them to a seamstress. TV isn't working correctly? Bring it to a repair shop. People made things last. That thriftiness became part of me, not just to save money, but because it made sense. Russia changed how I thought about waste, patience, and what I really need. After more than 2 decades here, I see the world differently. My expectations are more grounded. My opinions, a little more seasoned. I don't chase some perfect version of life anymore. I value the one I have. I'm married to a woman who's not perfect, but she's perfect for me. We have 2 wonderful daughters, and I've built a life that I love, even if it doesn't look like the fairy tale life which many others strive to obtain and never quite make it. I've worked 2 jobs here I really enjoyed. I've made friends who I'll never forget. And I've lived through things I never could have predicted. I've enjoyed my life here, and I can honestly say that life in Russia is rarely boring. Russia didn't just change where I live. It changed who I am. If you've ever lived somewhere long enough that it rewired how you think, I'd love to hear about it down here in the comments. Well, thanks for watching. Until next time, пока.